Story 1: The Runaway. Jack had always felt like an outsider. He never quite belonged in his small hometown, where everything was known and everyone had their place. His life had been a collection of mistakes, decisions made in the heat of the moment, and a lingering sense of regret. Every night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like there was something just beneath the surface of his existence that he couldn't shake. A feeling of unease that followed him wherever he went, like the ghost of something he'd long since buried. At the age of 28, Jack decided he couldn't take it anymore. He had to leave. He packed his things and drove across the country, cutting ties with everything he had known, his family, his friends, his past. He thought that by running, by starting fresh in a new place, he could finally escape the haunting memories that had plagued him for years. The new city was far from his small town, far from anyone who would know his name or his mistakes. It was perfect. For a while, everything seemed fine. Jack found a job working at a local bar, keeping to himself, making just enough to survive. But the nagging sense of dread, the sense that something was wrong, never quite left him. He kept telling himself it was just stress, that it was normal to feel uneasy after such a big life change. But that didn't explain the dreams. They started subtly, like all dreams do, faint flashes of faces he didn't recognize, fleeting images of places he'd never been, the whispers of voices that echoed through his mind in the dead of night. At first, he chalked it up to the stress of moving, to the overwhelming nature of starting over. But the dreams didn't stop. They became more vivid, more frequent. They were relentless. And then, it wasn't just the dreams. It was the things that started happening around his apartment. Little things, like his car keys disappearing, only to turn up in places he was sure he hadn't left them. The lights flickering at strange times, the hum of electricity that seemed to vibrate in the air. And sometimes, just out of the corner of his eye, he'd catch a glimpse of something, movement in the shadows, a fleeting figure, a face he didn't recognize staring back at him. Jack tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But the feeling only grew stronger. There was something, or someone, in his apartment. And it wasn't just the things that moved. It was the whispers. They were becoming harder to ignore. One evening, after another long day at the bar, Jack came home to find a note sitting on his kitchen table. He didn't remember writing it, and it wasn't in his handwriting. It read, "You can't escape." A cold shiver ran down Jack's spine. He stared at the note for a long time, unsure of what to think. Was it a prank? Or was it something else, something darker? He tried to laugh it off, dismiss it as a strange coincidence, but deep down, he knew it was something more. He felt it in the air, the thick, oppressive silence that seemed to hang in his apartment, like something was waiting for him to do something, anything, to acknowledge its presence. The next day, he went to work, his mind racing. But when he walked through the bar's front door, the world seemed to change. His boss, the one he had seen just hours earlier, was now lying in a pool of blood, his throat slashed open in a brutal, unmistakable manner. The office was in chaos, papers scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. And then, he saw it. On the wall, scrawled in what appeared to be blood, were the same words he had seen on the note the night before. "You can't escape." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the events, but nothing fit. The whispers had grown louder, more distinct now. They weren't just in his dreams anymore. They were in his waking life, surrounding him, pressing in on him from all sides. The world around him seemed to blur, and the terror that had once been distant now felt all too real. That night, Jack locked himself in his apartment, trembling with fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something just beyond the reach of his understanding. He tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. The hours dragged on, each moment stretching into infinity as the whispers grew louder and more frantic, as though something was getting closer, something was coming for him. It was then that he saw it, standing in the hallway, just beyond the bedroom door. A shadow. It was tall and thin, its shape almost impossible to make out. But there was something in its posture, something in the way it stood, that made Jack freeze in place. His heart stopped. His body went cold. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was paralyzed by fear, rooted to the spot as the shadow seemed to drift closer, its presence suffocating. Jack finally managed to break free, running out of the apartment in a panic. He couldn't look back. He didn't want to know what was following him. He ran, and he didn't stop. But no matter how far he went, no matter how fast he ran, the shadow was always just behind him, lurking in the darkness. And the whispers, they never stopped. They were with him now, following him everywhere he went. Jack realized, too late, that the past he had tried so hard to escape was always going to be there, waiting for him. And now, he would never escape. Story 2: The House on Willow Lane. The Thompson family had always dreamed of a life away from the city, away from the noise, the chaos, the constant bustle of everyday life. So, when they stumbled upon the old Victorian house on Willow Lane, they saw it as the perfect escape. The house was large, old, and had a strange charm to it, with its sweeping front porch and intricate details. It seemed like something out of a fairy tale. Mike and Sarah, along with their 2 young children, Lily and Sam, moved in quickly. The house was cheap, far cheaper than they expected for its size and location. It seemed too good to be true. They didn't hesitate. At first, it was perfect. The kids had plenty of space to play, and Mike and Sarah were finally able to relax, far from the stress of their former lives. But as the days wore on, small things started to happen, strange noises in the night, creaking floorboards when no one was awake, doors that would mysteriously be open when they were sure they had closed them. Sarah would sometimes hear whispers, faint, like voices coming from the walls, but whenever she would investigate, there would be nothing. But it wasn't until Sam started acting differently that Sarah began to get truly worried. Sam, their 7-year-old boy, had always been cheerful, full of energy, and eager to make new friends. But one evening, he started talking about someone named Benjamin. At first, Sarah thought he was just using his imagination, playing with an imaginary friend. It wasn't unusual for children to make up friends. But soon, it became apparent that Benjamin wasn't just an imaginary friend. He seemed real, too real. Sam began to speak to Benjamin as if he were there, as if he could see him. His tone was odd too, like he was having an argument with someone who was giving him instructions. At night, Sarah would sometimes hear Sam speaking in his room, but when she went in to check on him, he would be sitting on the edge of the bed, his eyes wide and unblinking, whispering to no one in particular. One night, Lily, Sam's older sister, overheard Sam speaking to Benjamin. What she heard made her blood run cold. Sam was not just talking to Benjamin. He was pleading with him, begging him to leave, to stop making him do things. The voice Sam used was desperate, filled with fear. Lily couldn't understand why her brother was acting this way, but she knew something was wrong. Desperate to understand, Sarah went through the old house, looking for any sign of what might be causing the strange behavior. That's when she found the attic door, hidden behind a rusted padlock, long forgotten by the previous owners. With trembling hands, Sarah unlocked it, pulling the door open to reveal the dark, dust-covered space above. Inside, she found an old journal, buried beneath the floorboards. The journal belonged to William Montgomery, the house's former owner, and it was filled with strange ramblings. He wrote about whispers in the night, strange figures moving through the house, and an entity that seemed to haunt the place. He spoke of a darkness, something that fed off fear and madness, something that had claimed his family long ago. The journal was clear. There was something in the house, something that had been there for generations, and it was never going to leave. That night, Sam disappeared. Sarah and Mike searched the house, calling his name, their hearts racing. But there was no answer. It wasn't until they heard a faint sound coming from the attic that they knew where he was. They rushed up the stairs, only to find Sam sitting in the corner, his eyes vacant, his body unnaturally still. The boy wasn't the same. His skin was pale, his lips curled into a twisted smile that didn't belong to him. His voice wasn't his own either. It was deep, raspy, as though it had been possessed by something far older and darker than a child should ever know. Mike tried to pull Sam away from the corner, but it was no use. The entity had already claimed him. The house had won. The Thompsons fled that night, abandoning everything they had worked for, their lives torn apart. The house on Willow Lane stood still in the distance as they drove away, watching them leave with its cold, empty gaze. And every year since, a new family moves into that house, unaware of what lies inside, unaware of the darkness that waits for them. Story 3: The Shadow of the Woods. Mark was never one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. He was a man of logic, a man who found comfort in reason and science. So when his friends dared him to spend a night alone in the old forest near town, he accepted without hesitation. He wasn't afraid of the woods. There were no ghosts there, no monsters, just trees and the occasional wildlife. The forest had a reputation, though. Locals told stories of strange happenings, of people vanishing without a trace, of strange figures moving through the trees in the dead of night. But Mark dismissed it all as nothing more than superstition, stories made up to scare the weak-minded. So, he ventured deep into the forest, setting up camp far away from the path. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew cold, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. The forest was silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. But as night deepened, the silence became oppressive. The air felt thick, suffocating. And that's when Mark heard it, the whispers. Soft at first, like distant murmurs, but they were unmistakable. Words spoken in a language he couldn't understand. Mark tried to ignore them, telling himself that it was just the wind, that it was just his imagination. But the whispers grew louder, closer, until they felt like they were all around him. He felt eyes on him, staring, watching, waiting. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something move in the shadows. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything he could recognize. It was tall, too tall, its figure almost human but wrong, twisted in a way he couldn't describe. Mark stood up, calling out to whatever it was, trying to convince himself that it was just another camper or maybe a trick of the light. But when he looked back, the figure was gone. He shrugged it off, thinking maybe it had just been his mind playing tricks on him. But when he turned around, the figure was there, standing in front of him, just beyond the reach of his campfire's light. The creature didn't move, didn't speak, it just stood there, staring at him with hollow eyes. Mark felt his heart stop. His body froze. And then, it started to move. It didn't walk. It just glided toward him, impossibly fast, its form never quite changing, its eyes never leaving his. Mark ran. He ran as fast as he could, through the trees, through the darkness. But no matter how fast he ran, the figure was always just ahead of him, never walking, but always there, always moving. He thought he was escaping, thought he had outrun it. But when he reached the clearing and saw the lights of his car, the figure was already standing there. Mark didn't have time to scream. It was already too late. The next day, they found his car abandoned in the clearing, the engine still running. There was no sign of Mark. No trace of him anywhere in the woods. But every year, someone disappears in those woods. And the shadow waits. Thank you for joining us on tonight's journey into the unknown. If you've experienced a story that haunts you, or if you have a terrifying tale of your own to share, don't keep it to yourself. Send your stories to the email listed in our channel profile. We might just feature them in an upcoming video. Stay safe, and remember, the darkness is always waiting.